Hello and welcome back to Analysis, where we've been discussing the upcoming election in Afghanistan and what it means about the state of the nation after 13 years of Karzai rule and 13 years, of course, occupation by NATO. In this half, we'll be discussing the implications for the country moving forward as NATO finally withdraws from the country. Many are concerned that the country might see the civil liberties that were won after the Taliban were forced from power in 2001 rolled back. But perhaps a far greater concern is the increasing reliance in many parts of the country on the opium trade, which NATO and Afghanistan forces have tried and failed to curtail over the last decade. There are also concerns over women's rights too. Recent laws on domestic violence in the Afghan parliament have raised serious concerns from human rights groups that the country is moving backwards. So what will a post-NATO, post-Karzai Afghanistan look like? And what will the outcome be for a country that has rarely known stability in all its history? Remaining me here in the studio to discuss this are Nazifa Hakbal, Second Secretary of the Human Rights and Women's Affairs Desk in the UK Afghanistan Embassy, and Dr. Mohammed Hotak, President of the British Afghan Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And joining us by Skype, we also still have William Reeve, a former BBC correspondent in Kabul. Welcome back to you all. Well, Nazifa, let me talk to you first of all. I mean, it's not just that NATO forces are pulling out or reducing substantially. A lot of the aid money is being cut, and some of the civil rights groups that work for women's rights are not having as much funding as they used to have. So how serious do you think this is, this potential lurch back into the past?
I think regarding women human rights in Afghanistan, it has rooted in the society of Afghanistan, new Afghanistan, in a new nascent democratic Afghanistan. And nobody will deny women's rights and their participation in the society. As the women in these 13 years, they gained remarkably achievement in all aspects of life. So in this issue, we can also see the campaigns from the candidate and then their own active participation in all aspects of life. So, but with regards to the pulling out or the cut of the aids, of course, there are some concern with the Afghan civil society, with the women particularly. But we believe that it has two dimensions, internal and external. The internal is that now the institutions and the laws, regulation, which has adopted during this 13 years, from constitution to the elimination of violence against women law, from criminal justice procedures, and many other Afghanistan National Action Plan for the Women of Afghanistan, gender equality budget. So we have many things for women's rights. So these internal procedures, improvement that will guarantee the women's right in Afghanistan. And the other thing that about external support from international community and alliances. Still, the women's right is one of the major priority of British foreign policy towards Afghanistan. And as you know, that the British has announced in this year their third percent of their aid to support women's political rights and political participation, political rights, and violence against women and their education. So I believe that despite the cuts, the gains will continue, and it will not slip or roll back. But at the same time, we should also acknowledge and confess that Afghanistan is not Afghanistan in 2001. It's totally changed. And now the government of Afghanistan are more willing to and are more self-reliance for the aid, and they are having some more initiative in order for the economic development of the country. So from this point also we will benefit women's.
You hope so. William, I mean, you say you've been in the north recently in October and November. Obviously the women's oppression is very much linked in public mind to the Taliban, but in the north, the areas where you've been visiting, apart from a few places, the Taliban are not present at all. I mean, do you sense that Afghan women's rights are much better in the north than in the south and east? William Reeve, I think.
In the Panjshir Valley, where it's very much a Tajik area. I've often been there and hardly seen any women at all. I was in a valley very nearby, just towards the end of last year, and women were, quite free by comparison by all yardsticks in many ways. I don't think it's necessarily just a Taliban thing. It's just in some different areas. They're very stringent with their treatment of women, and other areas not. I mean, Nazifa would be much more of an expert than me, but it is easier in the north without a shadow of a doubt, but not everywhere at all.
But are you concerned about the cut-off of aid to civil society groups?
I think aid is undoubtedly going to be cut down, and I mean I think with the drawdown of foreign troops, Afghans will be able to and need to and have to run Afghanistan more themselves, which I think is going to be a good thing. And I think certainly with trying to get the economy going and things like that, I think it will strengthen the arm of Afghans trying to get things together. On the question of women's rights in that question, I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid.
And do you have a view on the opium issue and whether that will become more of a serious factor than it was before, than it is now, rather?
Well, I'm afraid to say it's going to be difficult, keeping that under control at the moment. And I don't see that improving at this stage, I fear.
Mohammed, what's your view on that? Are you at all optimistic about that?
I would agree with Nazifa and William that if there is a major reduction in aid, Afghanistan still is not totally self-dependent. It would have an impact on many spheres of Afghan lives, and especially when it comes to women involvement in the society, women organizations. It would definitely, because most of the organizations in Afghanistan, they were highly supported by the funding that was going from Europe and America, which was making a huge difference. And these organizations were doing remarkable things in Afghanistan, working in the federal contracting arena and using trading between Britain and Afghanistan as a tool to empower Afghanistan and to make it into a self-sustainable economy. I know that the aid that's going on to Afghanistan at the moment is very important, and it will probably have a negative impact on the activities of the organizations and the services that were provided to the women of Afghanistan. I think there's still, although Afghanistan has come a long way in getting taxes and walking the path of self-sustainability, I still don't think it's in a stage where this sudden drop of aid would have no impact. It would definitely have an impact. It would have an impact on not only the women issues related to women, but also other sectors which are dependent, not fully dependent, but still dependent on foreign aid to some extent. And hopefully, especially our organization and other organizations like the British Afghan Chamber of Commerce, our aim is to get Afghanistan from aid dependency into self-sustainability, because Afghanistan has got resources of unmatched proportions in the region, to be honest. And if properly exploited, Afghanistan can become a major economy in the heart of Asia. And I hope we can play our role in that. And we are holding a conference to do so. But aid should continue. I think that suddenly with the whole idea of international troops coming out, I don't think governments should suddenly reduce the aid, which I know America has already reduced the aid that is given to Afghanistan.
Well, William, I mean, you've been watching Afghanistan and visiting the country for about 30 years, and obviously aid has been fluctuating at different points, suddenly a lot of aid and then almost total cut-off. What do you see as the biggest changes you've seen in Afghan life, ordinary life for people, in the 30 years that you've been covering it?
Well, I think of a more immediate nature, I've been heartened by seeing Afghan companies, sort of family businesses, quite large family businesses, who've been trying to really get their act together and start beginning to get business going and try and get the economy going in many ways. They're not vast in number, They vary in capabilities and that sort of thing. But that is an area that I would be very keen to see more. I saw quite a few in December and spoke to them. Some of them are trying to build up possibilities in the mining area, slightly larger scale economy. There's the smaller businesses, the sort of small and medium-sized businesses that there've been a lot of efforts to try and get them going, and it'd be wonderful if they got going more as well. And I do think that any country that depends so hopelessly on aid, if they go on depending on it, it's not a good thing. And I think that there are elements whereby the cutting down of aid might help in some ways for Afghanistan to really get its act together, for the government to get its act together, the new government, and for businessmen to feel that they can really get going as well, because out of necessity more than anything else for themselves and the country.
Nazifa, let me bring you onto another issue which we mentioned in the introduction, and that is the question of possible talks with the Taliban. I mean, it seems to have sort of gone off the agenda a bit. I mean, are any of these three likely candidates, the ones who are most likely to win, are they in favour of some kind of negotiation with the Taliban, or what is their position?
I think what's important for us to know that the peace is the aspiration of the people of Afghanistan, and the war should be ended. And for ending the war, it's important that the government and the people of Afghanistan accept the reality of peace. But one thing that is clear from the government of Afghanistan and also the new government, I hope that they will also consider it, that these peace talks will be according to the condition that the government and the people of Afghanistan will put this condition. And any government, any of these candidates that they will come, they will lead the peace talks according to the people's will, because this government will be elected from a democratic process, so the people of Afghanistan will have their voice in this. As President Karzai conducted the peace jirga, and according to the peace jirga, the Peace High Council High Council was appointed for peace negotiation. But
what are the conditions? You say they've got to be according to the conditions. What conditions?
The condition is that the Taliban should accept the constitution of Afghanistan, and in the constitution of Afghanistan, the democratic value and human rights value for both women and women has been enshrined in the constitution. So this should be accepted, and at the same time, the reality of the Afghanistan, the relation of Afghanistan with the Western and with the world, it's one of the reality and one of the necessities that they should accept, and also the gains that we have made during this 13 years, the freedom of expression, the women's rights, the civil society activity, and parliament, and these all freedoms and achievements that we have made in Afghanistan today is totally changed from Afghanistan 13 years before. So the Taliban or any opposition group, that they are willing as citizens of Afghanistan to come like any other citizens to sit in the parliament, in the government, and to do their private business, they have to accept these conditions. And without us, I believe that there won't be any peace talk.
Well, William Reeve, do you think that there are realistic expectations of talks with the Taliban that could lead to an end to the war?
Well, I think all sides have been talking to each other a lot. It's formal talks really get going. I mean, the one thing about the Taliban is that they didn't want to come to any agreement with President Karzai, who they say they viewed his government as corrupt, etc., etc. Karzai was certainly, I mean, both sides have been keen to talk. And I think, despite what they say publicly, I think it will very much depend on, in many ways, maybe on who does lead the government. But I think over the months and years to come, the Taliban will want more and more to talk to the government, to try to come to some political agreement. It is still difficult until there's a new government and until we hear what the Taliban have to say. Difficult to say at the moment, I think.
Well, thank you for that, and I believe you may have to go before the end of the programme, so thank you very much for taking part, William Reeve. Mohammed, I mean, the conditions that Nazifa said correctly, obviously, that the High Peace Council have laid out, in one way could be interpreted as surrender. The Taliban just basically have to stop fighting and accept the reality of parliament, constitution, etc., etc. Well, I mean, they've been fighting for 13 years. They won't just suddenly just stop like that without getting some concessions from the government or from the parliament. So what concessions can legitimately be given to the Taliban to get them to change their policy and stop fighting?
I think it's no more about the government, what concessions would they give to the Taliban. It's about the people. The people of Afghanistan are in a democratic state, and we know this, that they have always wanted democracy. It's just that they never had the chance to have democracy. If you're killing an innocent Afghan, an Afghan citizen, the Afghan people will be against you. So if you've got the people against you, what could Karzai or Ashraf Ghani or Abdullah, whoever comes into power after Karzai can do? So the very important thing that all presidential candidates agree on is this, that Taliban have to stop killing Afghan citizens, because that's exactly what they're doing. Innocent villagers are dying. Innocent people are dying. So as long as they continue killing innocent civilians, I don't think the government would be in a position to offer any concessions. And I think if Taliban realize that, and I'm sure there is a lot of Taliban who want to talk now, and we know this, that as far as the Afghan Taliban are concerned, they know, and I don't think they would want to, and this is what the presidential candidates also say, want to kill their own fellow countrymen. It's just that there are people, which all the presidential candidates and President Karzai always point to, that the problem and the Taliban is not just the Afghan people who are fighting. There are elements that are beyond the control of Afghanistan's people and Afghanistan's governments. So in that case, I don't think any presidential candidates can say that, or President Karzai can actually give any concessions to those that are not part of the Afghan society or are Afghans at all.
But don't the Afghan Taliban have some popular support? They couldn't survive without some support. And isn't it often based on the idea that local officials in villages and so on and provinces are corrupt, and that they can't get justice, people can't get justice from the existing government system? Now, that's not going to change because of elections, or is it?
I agree with you that the corruption is a major problem in Afghanistan, and it's the second biggest worry from the polls that we have seen for the people after security. But the justice that people seek, you can't go for justice, asking for justice, that if the rule of law can't provide you, you go for justice to Taliban, who would be on your side. Then that wouldn't be justice to the other person who's being prosecuted. So I don't think Taliban have any better alternative than the government to give justice. But surely there are people who would be with the Taliban. And we know there are a lot of financial incentives and a lot of other reasons why some people in Afghanistan would probably be with the Taliban. But we know that the Taliban have been defeated, and now Taliban is not as much as part of Afghanistan. It's something that's outside Afghanistan. And for that, we need the international community and we need the neighbors to come together, because the threat wouldn't just be for Afghanistan, the threat would be for the region. And that's what I believe. So if Taliban, as Nazifa said, I strongly agree with her, if they stop killing Afghan civilians, I don't think everybody says that. If you're an Afghan, regardless of who you are, Talib, non-Talib, if you're an Afghan and you value the life of another Afghan, you're the child of this nation. But if you kill a citizen of this nation, regardless of who you are, you're an enemy. And that's what President Karzai said. That's what the presidential candidates are saying. And the doors are open for Taliban. Taliban can come anytime they want. They have not been pushed out. It's just that they don't want to join the mainstream, or they just don't want to join the nation. And if I have a gun, I can make a lot of people do a lot of things. We know that the power of the gun is stronger than the power of common men, because they don't use guns. And now we know that democracy has given the voice to the people. And we know there are other people who are actually, some of their organizations are actually fighting against the Afghan government, but yet the same organizations have representatives standing for the presidential election. And we have seen that the polls show that they have no support whatsoever. It's just that there is no evidence to show that these people have support. It's just that they say what they feel like. If you really have a support, you would come forward like Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah and come into the elections and win.
Let me come back on this point. I mean, Mohammed says the Taliban have been defeated, but they are attacking a lot of government positions and police positions and so on. Of course, they're killing civilians too in very large numbers, but they're killing Afghan troops also in huge numbers. The Afghan army, Afghan National Army and police are taking much heavier casualty than NATO ever did. So have they really been defeated, the Taliban?
I think the Taliban or the enemy is always there, and it's of course defeated from the time when, after the military intervention of the US, they do not have their safe havens like they had or they used to have in Afghanistan, though they are killing the Afghan civilian, women, children, doctors, civilian especially, engineers, women rights activists, the assassinated women's children, and human rights activists, and especially the Afghan National Security Forces. But despite of these desperate attacks, they are not in a position that they were before. It shows that they are defeated. It doesn't mean if they come, because terrorism and extremism is something that the government cannot or to avoid it totally. But one thing which should be clear, that the security forces in Afghanistan defending extremism in Afghanistan and even defending extremism in this region. So the international communities and their support is very much needed in this regard, because still we are directly in a position of war with them. But we believe that they are not that stronger that they were used to be.
Okay, well, on that note, I'm afraid we've run out of time. We've come to the end of this episode of Analysis. I'd like to thank my guests and, of course, you at home for watching. Please tune in again for future discussions. And don't forget that you can keep up with our discussion by following us on Twitter at the address below, or by following Islam Channel Current Affairs on Facebook. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.